how the birth of Jesus Christ took place. When Mary, his mother, was engaged to Joseph, before they were married, she became pregnant by the Holy Spirit. Joseph, her husband, was a righteous man. Because he didn't want to humiliate her, he decided to call off their engagement quietly. As he was thinking about this, an angel from the Lord appeared to him in a dream and said, "Joseph, son of David, don't be afraid to take Mary as your wife, because the child she carries was conceived by the Holy Spirit. She will give birth to a son, and you will call him Jesus, because he will save his people from their sins." Now all of this took place so that what the Lord had spoken through the prophet would be fulfilled.
Look, a virgin will become pregnant and give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel. When Joseph woke up, he did just as the angel from God commanded, and he took Mary as his wife. But he didn't have relations with her until she gave birth to a son. Joseph called him Jesus. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
When he descended into his mother's womb, a great immeasurable light, more radiant than even the light of the gods, shone forth into the world. And even in the dark and gloomy spaces between the worlds, where the light of the sun and moon cannot reach, as powerful and majestic as they may be, even there, that light did shine. Who's that talking about? Anybody? That's the birth of the Buddha. When I was in Sri Lanka earlier this year, I perused titles at the bookstore of one of the many temples I visited, and one book title captured my attention in particular. Jesus and the Buddha, a study of their commonalities and contrasts. And one notable commonality is that their followers both describe their births as miraculous and as light coming into the world. The Buddha born 500 years before Jesus. Another commonality is that there is no single story about their births. As you probably already know, of the four Gospels, only two say anything about Jesus' birth, and those two have quite different details. For example, in Matthew, wise men from the east, or the Magi, or Zoroastrian astrologers, followed a light of the star they had seen at its rising. And when it stopped over the place where the child lay, they were overwhelmed with joy and offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Or as some of the children in my favorite video, Frankenstein in blood. Now in Luke, in a passage you could probably recite from memory, in that region there were shepherds keeping watch over their flock by night. Then an angel of the Lord shone before them, and the glory of the Lord shone all around them. Suddenly there was with them a multitude of the heavenly host, which means light shined so brilliantly in the shadows of that pasture, it became as bright as day. And then 8 days later, when Jesus was presented for purification in the temple, Simeon declared that the baby was, quote, light for revelation to the Gentiles and for glory to your people Israel. So, the story of the birth of the Buddha. Queen Maya dreamt that a pure white elephant entered the room where she was sleeping. The elephant carried a large lotus flower in its trunk and gave it to the queen. And the very moment the queen took the flower, though still a virgin, she conceived. And the room was filled with a heavenly light. Trees at once began to bloom with new flowers of every color. When she awoke, she told the king, and they consulted the 64 counselors about the meaning of the dream. And the chief counselor told them she would be pregnant with a boy who will either become the king after his father, or teach the people of many countries to know what they now do not understand. So before the queen gave birth, she traveled to the city of her parents, but along at a beautiful park, royal chair, and walked among the trees and through the flowers, and as she privacy, and 4 angels appeared, holding the 4 corners of a golden net. The baby was laid into it as if a cradle. And the angel said, "Be joyful, O lady, a mighty son is born to you." The baby stood and looked in all 4 directions. He took 7 steps, and with each step a lotus flower rose up. And then he lay down and fell asleep like any other day. When they arrived home, a hermit who lived nearby the palace came to visit, to see the baby. And he stood and he paid homage to the child and proclaimed he would grow to be a great man. You know, some of the similarities in those stories are so specific it's almost funny, including neither Joseph nor the king seem particularly necessary to that story. There are descriptions of angels, a cradle, animals, and words like someone paying homage to the child because a mighty son is born to you. And of course, there are differences, especially that Jesus was born of unmarried peasants, and the Buddha was born of a royal family, although he ultimately rejected that life and gave up all his earthly possessions. So as I read earlier, upon the Buddha's birth, light shined into the darkness. But as the author of the book, Jesus and the Buddha, said, the story was never meant to suggest that an actual light appeared when the Buddha was born. It was a way of saying that the advent of the Buddha would enable beings to become aware of each other, to see each other, thereby making empathy and understanding more possible. And that's a similar sentiment to what scholars like Marcus Borg have said about the stories of the birth of Jesus. That they may not be factual in a historical sense, but Borg said they are profoundly true. Now, was Mary born at Mary and Joseph's house where they already lived in Bethlehem? Or did a census require a very pregnant Mary to travel from Nazareth and give birth in a cow stall behind an inn with no rooms? Were shepherds watching their flock by night, or did wise men travel from the east? Or, you know what, maybe something entirely different. Were they chased to Egypt to live as refugees because a paranoid, tyrannical king threatened to kill the baby? Maybe yes, maybe no. Something can be true that didn't happen. It can still be very real. Did the Buddha stand upon being born? Did Queen Maya really experience no childbirth? But faith isn't about facts. Faith is about meaning, making sense of the world. And then, from that, how we live, impacting our choices and priorities and values, morals and ethics. Or so one hopes. The Sri Lankan author I referenced has been a monk for more than 40 years, but was raised a Christian as a boy. And he argues for mutual respect between the two religions, but he calls for more honesty about their real differences and even contradictions. He said some authors are too eager to harmonize the two into something like one religion, which he says only negates them both. Kind of like saying you're colorblind, because that means you don't see the beautiful and distinct differences. Well, Jesus and the Buddha were both loving and compassionate and peaceful They did seek different ends. However, Christians and Buddhists do agree that the births of their respective founders were miraculous in a way that brought light into the world, and that their lives revealed something of how to live and in and through darkness. The Buddha through enlightenment, Jesus as the fulfillment of the prophet Isaiah, who proclaimed, "The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. And those who lived in a land of deep darkness, on them light has shined." So I do want to focus on one often overlooked detail of the story of the birth of Jesus. That detail being Joseph. Overlooked. So much so that one year at the annual children's Christmas pageant, the boy who was supposed to play Joseph got sick at the last minute. And instead of recruiting a new Joseph from among the shepherds and wise men, the director decided we don't need him. He doesn't do anything anyway. But Joseph does do something important. Foremost, he decided not to abandon Mary publicly. Because either Mary would have been stoned, killed, or at the very least she would have been disowned, scratch out whatever living she could. So Joseph considered dismissing her privately to spare her reputation and or her life. But imagine for Joseph that decision. It must have been a very dark night of the soul as he agonized over this decision. Now, as you heard, Matthew described Joseph as a righteous man. And we may hear the word righteous and think that means self-righteous or holier than thou. But I like Scott Mose's description that a righteous person is anyone who lets their actions do the talking. So it's the opposite of all talk, no action. A righteous person has no need to say what they're doing or why, because their actions say it all. And in that way, Joseph was indeed a righteous man. You know that people had to have been talking behind his back, wondering whether Mary and Joseph had been engaged in a little premarital hanky-panky, or whether he was sticking with a woman who had been unfaithful to him. But Joseph didn't say anything to anyone. He just did the right thing. But even so, might have been judged for doing the wrong thing by some very self-righteous people. And how did Joseph know what was right? How did he come to that conclusion? Did you catch? Joseph finally knew what to do when he fell asleep. He could finally hear when he couldn't argue with himself anymore. That's when an angel could get through to him and say, "Don't be afraid to marry her." So did that literally happen? Or perhaps, better, is it a true story? But if not true, you know what? For sure, it is real. Because this is what's real. Joseph had absolutely nothing to do with creating the mess that confronted him. And because of that, Joseph had every reason to walk away in search of a simpler, easier life, a more conventional life. But he didn't. A righteous person won't complain that they didn't cause the chaos. They'll simply go and do what needs to be done. But here's what's more important. He decided God was in that mess. Now, how often do we think we'll finally find God, or we'll finally find time for God when all of our messes are cleaned up? You ever thought that all that mess and chaos in your life is an obstacle? But the mess was the necessary condition for the Messiah to be born, for God to give birth to the Holy, and for light to break forth. Not to take anything away from Mary, but we can't miss Joseph from our manger. He can't be gone in the Christmas pageant. He must not go missing, because this story might not have happened. We need him for it to be true, because he helps to make it real for us. Because you know what? One day you may find yourself presented with a circumstance you didn't choose, wouldn't choose, and ask yourself, how did I get here? You may want nothing more than to divorce yourself from everything you see around you, from whatever your life has become. But that is the time when we're tired enough, worn out enough, weak enough, disgusted enough that we can finally hear the whisper of an angel saying, "Do not fear, for God is with you." This may be a dark time in your life right now. Ironically, as we know, the holidays sometimes bring out the worst of our feelings of loss and grief. In addition, we are living, of course, through some of the very darkest days of our nation ever. Feeling like it's going to take a very long time to clean up a mess we didn't create. But not to fear. Because these are exactly the kinds of times God chooses. That is, when we are finally tired enough, worn out enough, weak enough, disgusted enough to hear the whisper of an angel. Do not be afraid, for God is with us in this mess. It's not an obstacle. As God has done before, God will use this time, chooses this time, to bring light into the world. To bring light into the darkest places of our world and of our lives. And was said of the Buddha, and even in the dark and gloomy spaces between the worlds, where the light of our moon and sun cannot reach, as powerful and majestic as they are, even there, that light did shine. For any religion that brings light into the world during our darkest days, that doesn't try to take advantage of the darkness, amen? I give thanks. And for any religion that offers hope, peace, joy, and today, love, do you give thanks?